Existentialism. You've probably heard that word thrown around, right? It sounds pretty heavy, maybe a little complicated. But what if I told you it's less about some dense, dusty philosophy and more about a whole new way of looking at yourself and your place in the universe? Let's dive in and figure this thing out.
You know, to really get what existentialism is, it kind of helps to see what people have called it over the years. And honestly, it's been called everything. Some people say it's just pure pessimism, a philosophy of despair. Others call it nihilism, a belief in nothing. It's even been dismissed as just cafe philosophy or accused of making people lazy. And then, on the complete opposite end, some say it's radical individualism. These labels are all over the map, which is actually our first big clue that we're dealing with something really different here.
All right, here it is. This is probably the single most important key to unlocking this whole idea. Existentialism isn't really an ism in the first place. Seriously, it's not some school of thought with a big rulebook that everyone has to agree on. In fact, it was born as a protest against exactly those kinds of rigid, one-size-fits-all systems.
So, if it's not an ism, then what the heck is it? A much, much better word is drishti, a perspective, a point of view. Think of it as a completely new way of looking at the human situation itself.
A really great way to think about this perspective is like looking through a giroka, a window. I love this analogy. You can't really prove or disprove the view from a window, can you? You see what you see. Existentialism is just opening a new window on life, and anyone who takes a peek through it is going to see the world in a very specific light, a view that's colored by the raw, messy, real experience of just being human.
Okay, so where did this new window, this new perspective even come from? Well, it popped up as a kind of protest, a protest against the super abstract, detached way that traditional philosophy always talked about life. It was just tired of all these big ideas that had absolutely nothing to do with what it actually feels like to be alive.
And just look at the difference here. It's night and day. On one side, you have traditional philosophy, which loves to focus on abstract concepts, right? It analyzes an idea, like immortality, from a safe distance. But the existentialist perspective, it focuses on human truths. It couldn't care less about the abstract idea of immortality. What it cares about is the gut-punch reality that I must die. And that's the whole game. The shift from being a spectator, watching the world, to being an actor, living right in the middle of it. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard just nailed it. He was pushing back against all that abstract stuff. And he asked, are we to watch the play? We are playing in it. We're not just sitting in the audience of life, folks. We are the actors on the stage, living out the drama every single day.
All right, so we've seen what existentialism is fighting against. Now let's get into what it's building towards. It's a really powerful story about what it truly means to be human. The name itself gives us a massive clue. Existence actually comes from the Latin ex sist, which means to emerge or to stand out. This is so cool because it tells us that to exist isn't just to be there, like a rock or a chair. For us, it's a dynamic process. We are constantly emerging, constantly becoming, constantly defining who we are.
So where does this story of emerging and becoming actually happen? It happens inside us. It's the story of our antarikta, our inner self, our own private world. It's a deeply personal journey that no one else can take for us.
And this inner journey has a few key milestones. First, there's freedom, or swatantrata. This is that huge, maybe even scary realization that we are fundamentally alone and totally free to make our own choices. But that freedom isn't a free pass. It comes with total responsibility, or dayettva, for every single one of those choices. And this all leads to the ultimate challenge, authenticity, or pramanikta. Do we face up to this freedom and responsibility? Or do we run from it and choose to live an inauthentic life? Now, facing this kind of radical freedom, well, it tends to bring up some pretty intense emotions. Anxiety, dread, anguish, despair, and this deep sense of shunyata, or nothingness. And we're not talking about your everyday worry about, paying the bills. This is a much deeper existential kind of anxiety. It's the kind where if someone asks you, what are you anxious about? The only honest answer is, nothing in particular. It's an anxiety tied to the terrifying freedom of being alive in a world that doesn't come with an instruction manual.
So how in the world are you supposed to deal with all these feelings? Well, this is where not all existentialists agree. The perspective actually splits off into two main streams, one that is faith-based or theistic, and one that is not.
What's really fascinating is that both branches start in the exact same spot, with the individual's raw inner experience of freedom and anxiety. But they end up in two very different places. Theistic existentialists, they find a foundation for their inner life in faith, in God. Atheistic existentialists, on the other hand, keep going without God, basically finding the whole concept irrelevant to figuring out what it means to be human.
So why did this whole way of thinking just explode in the 20th century? It was a direct response to a very modern crisis, aman me karnan, or dehumanization. Think about it. In an age of world wars, giant anonymous cities, and factory assembly lines, people started to feel like they were becoming cogs in a machine. Existentialism was this passionate scream against all of that, a desperate attempt to reclaim the individual, to shout that even in a chaotic world, our freedom, our choices, and our inner lives still matter more than anything.
And that brings everything right back to us here and now. You see, existentialism isn't just some old philosophy you study in a book. It's a perspective that throws a challenge right at your feet. It's not about finding the meaning of life, but about having the courage to create meaning in your life. Which leaves us with one last very powerful question. How are you living your existence authentically?